Thanks. Evan, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, bonjour, hola from Jumbo. So Bekir, good morning. My name is Anantha Krishnan, the Secretary General of Urban Economy Forum. Good morning again, and welcome to the first Habitat in Towns Collingwood World Summit program that will take place today and tomorrow. Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, Honourable Member of Parliament Adam Vaughan, His Worship Mayor Saunderson, Mayor of Collingwood, UN Habitat Director Eduardo Moreno, co-chairs of Urban Economy Forum Reza Purwaziri and Julie Ward, city leaders, honourable speakers, and dear participants. I have the honour of requesting Worship Brian Saunderson, Mayor of Town of Collingwood and co-chair of Habitat in Towns, who has been an Olympic sportsman and the mayor since 2018 and a lawyer, to take the floor. Here you are, Worship Saunderson.
Thank you very much, Krishnan. As Mayor of the Town of Collingwood, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Habitat in Towns Collingwood World Summit. Collingwood is very excited to be hosting this summit, and we hope this will be the first of many annual international conferences for mayors and town councillors, city managers and staff, urban practitioners and professional stakeholders, and the academia to share their practices, thoughts, policies, and challenges around sustainability and how we are confronting non-sustainable aspects in our communities. We are here today to talk about livelihoods and lifestyles and how, based on best practices, we can create transformation towards sustainability in all its forms in our communities. And I will now share our land acknowledgement. Today, we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. It is my great pleasure now to introduce James Carpenter from Alderville First Nation. James is a healer at the Anishinaabe Health Toronto. He is a messenger who travels to different communities across Canada and works with the pipe, spirits, and medicine ceremonies. James has shared his Indigenous teachings and wisdom in our community, and we are thankful for his contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, James Carpenter.
home is of the earth. I've been asked in a very kind way to do some opening ceremonies for our events over the next few days. And in this kind way that I was asked, I was also asked if I could share a little bit of teachings that I think we all hold true to each and every one of us. I am very honored and grateful that the town of Collingwood and the UN has started to take on this work looking forward. In some of the teachings that our ancestors have shared with me as a child, as a grandchild, has been that every time we think of something, every time we think ahead, we must also think of the next 7 generations that are coming after us. So when we plan for that our children and their children and their children have a place to call home. You see, this home that we're all in, it is a part of all of us. Everything in this beautiful creation has been shared with all of us and been shared with all spirits. In Anishinaabe-Moan, in the languages around our area, we say, Kinagoa Mashkinam, which means all our medicines. What we see here in our journey, we often see many places that we hold true to our spirit. We hold true to our memory. We hold true to our journey here. This truth has been understood and known for generations before us and generations that we hope come after us. You see, in our way of life, each and every one of us, each and every one of our ancestors, they all played an important role with understanding the land and resources that were around them. There has been a balance of old ways and old times when families and communities depended on each and every individual within those communities to ensure the sustainability of each and every one of us. And we look to creation for all that sustenance to help us to continue, to help us move forward, to ensure that we move forward in a kind and most gentle way. When I was approached to speak on behalf of the spirits, on behalf of the forest, I find it with great honor to share that story, to share the story of creation that we are all a part of. We are all a part of this most important circle. The most important circle that we're all a part of course, is Mother Earth. And we look to the 4 elements right here, right now. We look to sustainability. We look at all this creation around and we ask, what helps it to grow? What helps it to thrive? What helps it to be itself? And you know, we look at this wonderful ancestor here, this tree. This tree has been resilient along its journey. And for us, as fellow citizens of creation, we come together in this event to look forward, The relationship that we share with all these things, it's in us, it's around us. You know, we have energy that can be harnessed from the sky world, from the grandfather's son, who, as you can see, feeds all these beings, feeds all of our plants and our medicines, our vegetables. And then if we look over that way a little bit, we see the water in the bay and the power of that water and that local resource that is responsible for everything that we are. That water is there, that life giver, that sacredness. You know, we look to the future of that water. And now we look around us and we can look at the earth and all the beings that dwell on this earth. And we want to ensure that those spirits that are out there, that they have a voice. And then, of course, we always look at that breath of life. The relationship that we have to all of these trees and plants. We ask ourselves, you know, we have an understanding of what the trees and the plants and the forests, what they do for us. And sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what do we do for that forest? And sometimes we think that we may not be doing anything for that forest or the land. But I wanted to share some truth. We have a relationship with these trees, all of us. Because with every breath we exhale, that is their breath that they breathe in. There's a balance there. With every breath that the tree exhales, we inhale a part of that medicine, that exchange. And this is what this is, an exchange of many ideas to share for that main points that we're looking at. The resiliency of our connections to give voice to all of creation. The sustainability of everything. To look for better ways to ensure that when our ancestors and our future generations that aren't here, they look at us and they say, hey, you know, our ancestors really cared about creation. It's also fitting for us today, you know, that I'm right beside a sacred being. What you see here, that is the womb of Mother Earth. Some call it a sweat lodge. But what we see here is the relationship to Mother Earth. You see, this is the womb of Mother Earth, where when we look at sustainability, when we look at the womb, we can see that creation wants to exist. Creation wants to be. And that lodge represents the birth, the newness. We go into that ceremony, we go back to the womb of Mother Earth to build our relationships with all of creation so that we can remember that we are here to walk in balance. And I say chimigwech to everyone in attendance, because you're a part of that circle that says we care, that circle that says creation is important, and that we have a responsibility to give voice to the spirits of creation. And we have a responsibility to ensure that the next 7 generations that are coming behind us are left in a harmonious and peaceful and balanced relationship with everything that is connected. We have an opportunity, all of us, to help ensure everything, kinagoa mashkina, that all the medicines always will be. Miigwech, everyone, and open up your minds and hearts. And when you're out there in creation, remember your relationships to all things. Miigwech. Bamampi, till we talk again.
Thank you. That was indeed a heartwarming and inspiring words and ceremony, Mr. James Carpenter. The indigenous population has a long, deep, and important history in Canada. In these difficult times for communities all over the world, it is good to remember that we remember what James Carpenter said not so long ago. What medicine people do is they go to the spirit and ask the spirit and find a way within that person to help them. Thank you. It's a great honor for me to speak to you at this opening session of Habitat in Towns Collingwood World Summit. I'm looking forward to hearing visionary remarks, deep analysis, constructive exchange of ideas, and practical solutions and discussions that will take place over the next 2 days. I encourage you all to look at the program and join the various sessions that we have planned. Our program has been shared in the chat. Just look at your chat box on your Zoom screen. Habitat in Towns is an international summit and a collaborative effort between Urban Economy Forum, UN Habitat, and the wonderful town of Collingwood. This collaboration began nearly a year ago when Collingwood and UEF embarked on a journey to create something specific for towns. They later launched Habitat in Towns of Collingwood meeting on February 4th this year, and Collingwood is a forward-thinking town, both through their council, staff, and local community. It is through their strong commitment to urban sustainability and resilience that this conference is made possible. This summit aims at articulating clearly the narrative of towns, smaller cities, and city districts in responding to contemporary urban challenges. This is important because small cities are numerous, and they're growing rapidly. A World Bank report recently said that small cities, at least cities above 50,000 population, they are called cities, and those below 50,000 are so-called towns and smaller cities and relatively smaller urban settlements. The population living in cities with high density of at least 50,000 has more than doubled in the last 40 years. It was what, 1.5 billion in 1975, now it's about 3.5 billion. So which means, if you look at globally, 48% of population live in what is called as the big cities, yeah? And about 24% live in rural areas, and remaining people, 28%, live in towns and small cities. It's a formidable number that's growing rapidly. Then, of course, it's almost a cliche to say that the world today is faced with unprecedented challenges and opportunities. But indeed, it's true. In 10 years' time, 2/3 of the world's population will be living in urban areas, and demographically, within 30 years, over 15% of the population will be above the age of 65. So the changes taking place are putting new pressures on public services, and migration is happening at a scale previously unknown, and people and communities are now living with the impacts of COVID-19 and, of course, climate change. While, of course, we have very romantic or very exciting fictional versions of small towns, such as Algonquin Bay in Ontario, in the serial Cardinal, Allende del Sol, Mexico Criminal Minds, and the Weatherfield Coronation Street, or Springfield, The Simpsons, or South Park. They are very popular TV series. But again, They are fictional. Time and again, it has been shown that towns and small cities are at a distinct disadvantage when trying to enact sustainability policies due to capacity. That means staff time, lacking skills, and local revenue. Then studies indicate that they often have limited local government service delivery and planning capacity. In many places, the limiting factor in terms of policy making, including sustainability programs, what is it due to? It is often due to the lack of capacity. So what is needed is a kind of professional management and capacity building. Furthermore, small towns depend more on citizen or political leadership. This is quite important and interesting. The role of local leaders is very important in the decision to apply for membership of these programs. The role of citizens also important in towns. A UN Habitat report pointed out some time ago that strategies for dealing with housing, transportation, or leadership development, they tend to be combined with more traditional economic development strategies in smaller towns as part of comprehensive development strategy. We all remember that in 1992, the Health Summit adopted Agenda 21, and following the Agenda 21, we also adopted what is called the Local Agenda 21 for local governments. But of course, we know how far it has gone. Unfortunately, towns and small cities have been facing a paradox between their images of sustainable places and the fact that most of them do not implement sustainable development policies. The French urbanist, I think Hélène Mayne, she wrote that, for example, in France, the reality often is different from the mainstream images of small towns and cities. Like other communities, towns and cities are facing, small cities are facing a host of challenges ranging from job creation and population losses, and in many cases to development pressures and changing landscape in others. Another issue is collaborative schemes with neighboring communities and municipalities is quite an important aspect in enhancing the capacity. The diversity then of small cities and towns should be considered as the possibility. They are different depending on the demographic and economic trends. In some places, there is depopulation taking place, other places, population is increasing. The location from greater urban, location actually is important too. Which they are near greater urban centers, they also have a major special aspect as small towns integrated to the metropolitan areas. And if there are different opportunities when there are remote ones, assuming the role of local centers and rural surroundings. And IIED, International Institute for Environment and Development Study in the UK, looked at the African continent and smaller cities, how they are tackling climate change challenges. While climate-related hazards are faced by smaller cities in Africa today, and how will they confront it in the future? What are the obstacles governments and residents face in adapting to climate change? The answer they found was interesting. These case studies from Eastern, Southern, and Western Africa, it was found that small cities do have the potential not only to protect their infrastructure and residents from climate hazards, but also serve as catalysts of climate-smart development in their own hinterlands. But then, however, governance problems and lack of finance, they severely limit their ability of small African cities to realize the potential. The potential is there. It needs to be realized through resource mobilization and accessibility of resources. In China, for example, you have, on the other hand, there are emergence of blind towns, it has been noticed. These characteristic small towns have been unique for the type of urbanization that China is exploring as a bridge between large city and villages. And they could be more ecological and human scale compared to urban diseases, for example. Yet, the blindness is mainly raised from the local governments taking this as a new opportunity to getting central policy support to put in, without putting into consideration sustainable aspects of how these small towns have to be developed. There are nearly about 1,000 such towns are being planned. It may be a good alternative, or at least these options, metropolis work and life, given the rapid town emerging types of business lifestyle. In China, for example, many small cities see COVID-19 as an opportunity too. While the worry of sustainability is also related to issues such as non-matching with local features, conflict between new habitants and investors, original residents, and environmental business. Then you have the unique, interesting area of particularity in China. The urbanization word literally means urbanization of cities and towns. that is, it may look like oxymoron, but it's an interesting word too in the Chinese context. So, for example, Chinese consumer goods are flooding the rest of the world largely because of small towns. Nearly 200 single industry small cities and towns like Gurao, that is known as the lingerie and underwear town of the world. They sprang up along China's eastern border. In many countries, single industry economy in small cities are at the same time not the same as in China. They can make poverty hard to escape. It often leaves a legacy of rigid social stratification, political controls, and permeates daily life. The experience of indigenous people, for example, North America, is quite interesting in that context. And also economic development in small towns in the US. Many of the tools typical of a traditional development pattern is not available given the town's population. Like, for example, they have difficulties developing a commercial tax base, and they're not viable. Towns such as Blandford in Massachusetts are dependent on building its own residential tax base while simultaneously minimizing the amount of additional funds it has to invest. So the answer is diversifying local economy from a single industry is critical. Due to continued use of coal, for example, in Poland, it is one of the most polluted cities, small towns in Europe. 33 out of 50 towns in Poland account for European small town pollution. Not even mountain retreats are immune to this. However, tourism-dependent communities can build their natural advantages and protect themselves against seasonably low wages, retaining at least some of the natural resource jobs. So there are opportunities like tourism, at the same time constraints if you're dependent on only one industry. On the other hand, an interesting example is Australia, where big cities want fewer new arrivals, whereas smaller towns, Australian outback country towns, they are welcoming migrants and refugees to revive the economy and revive the life and economy of these countries. Even provincial towns in South Korea are becoming more cosmopolitan. On the other hand, Nordic governments such as Norway, they place emphasis on innovation and growth orientation in smaller towns and cities. And they also emphasize on equity-oriented redistributive policies with equal access. So central government has a greater responsibility in redistributing access to small towns, small cities, all over Norway, for example. In India, small towns are often looked upon as offering wholesome contrast and counter to undesirable effects of large industrial cities. But now it has shown that smaller cities and towns in India are going to pay the higher cost for COVID-19 rather than larger metropolises. Small cities have been unequal partners in India's urbanization with historically poor investment infrastructure, planning and governance. It is also time to echo what Scottish towns are saying. The promise of a networked urban system with choices to support an increasingly diverse society is not met with the support and investment to deliver the reality. Meanwhile, there is hope.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Hello?
The children balance of so the David has sent them
Hello, sorry, somebody has their microphone on. If they could please mute it.
Can I speak now?
Yes, please do so, Krishnan. Sorry about that.
Sorry for the, this always technology is not, trouble-free. And it also gave some sort of a brief pause from my speech as well. Anyway, as what Scottish towns are saying is that the promise of a network urban system, if they have to deliver the promises of increasing diverse society, then need to be supported and investments are necessary. Meanwhile, there's hope that changes are taking place in an era of technological, communicational, social transformation that can help to overcome the challenges. So towns are central elements, for example, of food systems as market nodes, centers for processing, storage, and access to inputs and services. The famous Canadian urban economist and visionary Jane Jacob, in her 1969 book, The Economy of Cities, she reversed the popular notion that cities were made possible when humans turned from hunter-gatherers to agriculture. That's what the general belief was. She said it was not the reason. No, she said. There was another way around. Concentrations of people living in the proximity of places conducive to trade, specializing in trading with each other and with outsiders, created a demand that led to the development of agriculture in the vicinity. Like the Maya towns in the last centuries are some examples of this. I'm sure you will agree that towns are a place where that can live and deliver prosperous, welcoming, and healthy communities with citizens. One report from the EU says that the monotonous and what shall I say, monofunctional satellite towns will undergo urbanization process with a more colorful, socially mixed, and multifunctional outcome. So what needed is that we must build and plan towns with connect rather than separate citizens. Connectivity is important, community engagement is another. Hence, this summit provides the opportunity to take advantage of being part of a network and sharing experience of good practices. The summit will ascertain the need for new alliances and approaches essential for towns and small cities to have strong competitive urban economy. What it also emphasizes that equity will assist them making it possible to example of a global network. There's a need to shape local and small city agenda in line with the UN's new urban agenda for these places. As you all know, the new urban agenda was adopted at the Habitat 3 conference in Quito in 2016. It actually aims to be a vehicle for implementing the 17 sustainable goals of development goals of the UN, mainly the Sustainable Development Goal 11, sustainable and resilient towns and communities at local level. Our focus is to build strong, resilient, and sustainable urban economies and to establish financial approaches that will help towns of today to be prosperous ones of tomorrow, but not only today, but in the future as well. As you know, 2015, we adopted the 17 SDGs. It's already 5 years gone. So we have only 15 years left for citizens, communities, towns, and cities to work together to achieve these goals. And so we have to identify ways of doing things in a sustainable way. In the wake of COVID-19, we have realized that we cannot continue to doing things in the usual way of old path of consumption, environmental disregard, and passing cost of future generations. It's worth remembering what Margaret Trudeau said in her key speech at Habitat 1 in 1976 in Vancouver. We don't want promises, we want commitment, we want action. That's what this summit is hoping to achieve too. This is what small cities and towns expect from higher levels of governments, regionally and nationally. A sustainable local economy means less travel miles, eating food with less food miles, promoting the use of local business, and keeping resources locally. So also we can talk about circular economy, what opportunities they provide, waste management. We are gathered here today virtually in the town of Collingwood because we believe that through Collingwood's dedication to lead and achieve these goals, we are one step closer. We are hopeful that the town leaders here today also choose to embark on this journey with the town of Collingwood. The journey will not be easy. In the rephrasing the words of Lao Tzu, the wise man of the East, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, and accordingly. Similarly, the small town of Collingwood has now taken a big step with this global summit, along with the UN Habitat and Urban Economy Forum. So Habitat in Towns will work toward creating a network of towns to bolster their voice at the global stage. It aims to create a platform to identify and share good practices. While Habitat in Town hopes to establish global programs initiative, it also hopes that you will leave this meeting with ideas for action that you can establish today and tomorrow in your own towns. So we have to do this together. At Habitat in Towns, we expect to learn about numerous challenges and opportunities. This will come from political, practical, and academic perspectives. Different towns and small cities will adopt different strategies on triggers for action. We recognize that in the post-COVID era, business as usual approach will not work. Globally, local governments and community leaders are often asked to deal with problems for which they are ill-equipped or underprepared, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, underlying all these strategies for empowering towns and small cities is critical need to build capacity, adjust to change, and make resources available. This means that understanding local strengths and weaknesses, as well as the larger context that we expounded by speakers and panelists, will be expounding these, how to achieve these ideas in action. Only with strong community capacity can towns and small city leaders take advantage of opportunities waiting on the next horizon. Studies after studies show that although women make a crucial contribution to the prosperity of cities, and in particular towns and small cities, through their paid and unpaid work, they remain at a disadvantage in terms of equitable access to work and living conditions, health, education, assets, and representation in formal institutions and governance. Even though we have seen that the women town leaders make better leaders to govern cities than otherwise. Urbanization's potential to deliver sustainable development and better quality of life for all urban residents depends on the recognition of the important role of unpaid care work, typically, but not always performed by women, in ensuring that children, older people, and those who are sick are looked after. This is amply, exemplified, or we have experienced during COVID-19, has amply proven how important it is. I want to highlight one of the most important outcomes that we can have from Habitat in Towns, the resolution. We hope that with your cooperation, a resolution can be adopted to strengthen the bond between the participants and the work and help broader audience to benefit from our work. The resolution will include the main points from our discussions and finalized in the afternoon of day 2. That means the resolution will be, the draft will be circulated, the inputs from the different panels will be incorporated in the resolution, and we will have a democratic discussion tomorrow afternoon. So what will happen is that the anchor of the summit will be the adoption of the agreed document or resolution. The day 2 afternoon will be dedicated for that. We all know that towns aren't just a series of buildings, streets, and pavements. They are made of people and local communities. So the aim of this summit is to support the task for forging a new vision of towns and small cities, and it's crucial that the voices, views, and ideas of local people are at its heart. While with the leading role of Collingwood, the summit can facilitate the understanding of how small city learns to innovate, not just by integrating smart technologies with urban infrastructure, but also boosting economic growth, creating capacities for fast development, removing dependencies, increasing autonomy, and monetizing resources for small city projects. At the neighborhood scale, in addition, one can also set insight into how ordinary citizens learn to live with the constraints of smart city transformations, but also how they build capacities. Then I look forward to this important initiative and your engagement contributions that can help us to work together towards the greater good. The famous philosopher Immanuel Kant said, the nice thing about living in a small town is that when you do not know what you're doing, someone else does. That's what we're going to do. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and have a great summit. I would then like to take the opportunity to invite Right Honorable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, who is serving as the 29th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Honorable Dowdeswell's active role in environment protection over the years, including being the Executive Director of UN Environment Program, the first woman to hold that position. There she had tackled issues of trade, globalization, climate change, and she was among the first to be involved in the Climate Change Convention negotiations, attended the C40, the big cities climate change C40 meeting in last year, for example. What is interesting for us here is that having started Honorable Dowdeswell, her career as in a smaller city of Saskatchewan. Honorable Dowdeswell is keen on environmental sustainability at the level of smaller cities and communities. She has received a number of honors, like as the Officer of the Order of Canada, the Dame of Justice of the Most Venerable Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, Member of the Order of Ontario, and Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. All these accolades are indeed quite important for us to remember. Awaiting eagerly to hear your words of wisdom, Honorable Elizabeth Dowdeswell.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Bonjour, bonjour. I join you today from Toronto, from the lands of many Indigenous peoples from time immemorial, and I recognize in particular the Mississaugas of the Credit. A very warm welcome to all of you attending Habitat in Towns Collingwood World Summit. And congratulations to the Urban Economy Forum Association, UN Habitat, and the town of Collingwood for hosting this dialogue. I would like to, in particular, thank Mayor Brian Saunderson for being such a champion of sustainability. I have seen firsthand his community's collaborative spirit, and I can assure all participants that you're fortunate to have all hands on deck as Collingwood and surrounding areas seek to move forward amid this unprecedented global pandemic. Last year, I took part in the inaugural Urban Economy Forum. The gathering was a watershed moment for data-driven policymaking, bringing together both mayors, who were urban practitioners, and academics who had tapped into a global network of expertise. Looking back, I think that exercise yielded many what I would call recipes for resilience. So I'm delighted to be here with you today. The momentum continues with representatives from nearly every continent. Someone has suggested that sustainability is not about competition, but rather about collaboration, which is why I'm particularly intrigued by your ambitious plans in this 75th anniversary year of the United Nations. I look forward to learning more about the concept of establishing a World Secretariat for Habitat in Towns, creating a global network, by your efforts to mainstream the City Prosperity Initiative platform, and by the very ambitious ideas proposed in the summit resolution. An overriding observation of my past nearly 6 years as Lieutenant Governor in Ontario has been that the importance of municipal governments is often overlooked. And yet it is, in fact, the order of government that is closest to people. And that has certainly been reinforced as I've watched the community building that has taken place during the last 5 to 6 months of challenge and opportunity. Certainly, the potential for societal transformation at the local level was abundantly clear at last year's C40 World Mayors Summit, but it's not just about megacities. Nobody is immune from the challenges confronting us. We see tremendous change in more modestly sized communities. And in fact, I like to think of them as laboratories for democracy. The fact is today, such leadership is more important than ever. The stakes are higher than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic has been absolutely unforgiving in revealing the true impact of global interdependence, geopolitical shifts, and technological advances. We have come face to face with the devastating fragility of our social and economic systems. And with few exceptions, institutions designed in the last century are struggling to cope with changed circumstances. Throughout this crisis, local governments have been leading the way in finding ways forward. I think of one municipality that pre-bought empty hotel rooms in anticipation that women might be in danger of domestic violence during lockdown. And that's just one example of communities seizing the opportunity to build capacity and to adapt in lasting ways. I could give you many examples of ways in which transportation has changed, access to food, efforts to increase high-speed internet availability. And while the virus is still with us and will be for some time, undoubtedly, here in Ontario, we are starting to reopen and recover cautiously and safely. We now have an opportunity to ask ourselves what sustainability actually looks like in a post-COVID world. Like many of you, for years I've been talking about holistic and systemic approaches that connect the dots, that actually integrate the pillars of sustainability agenda, inclusive prosperity, environmental stewardship, and social cohesion. And now we can see scientists and researchers racing with single-minded focus to develop a vaccine, showing us, in fact, that trust in science has been at the heart of evidence-based policymaking. We see industries retooling their production lines, pivoting. We see the testing of more sustainable financial models, the potential healing of nature as many of the drivers of pollution are reduced, and the empowerment of citizens and the building of community. Because of the urgency of the pandemic, we've seen all orders of government working together in common cause. Partisanship has been almost invisible. Many of the people I've talked to have mused, wouldn't it be wonderful if that actually became the norm? And then chuckled to themselves, not likely. My response to that is, why not? That's why I'm so proud to join you today, because you understand that this new way of working should not be reserved just for times of crisis. It is the way of the future. In many ways, it's how local governments have always acted. And the COVID crisis has shown us that such approaches actually work. We've finally broken through some of the isolation of sectors. And for example, more than ever now, we see that we're actually unlikely to return to a fully productive economy unless and until we deal with issues of childcare and education. My sincere hope is that we will not simply drift into a new normal, because we have the opportunity to design and build a better normal. Call it a reset, if you like. Can we maintain the momentum of lessons learned and avoid collective amnesia? Will it be a green recovery? Will we create the conditions for sustainability and resilience, particularly with the ever-present and looming crisis of climate change? Will we be bold and ambitious? And perhaps most importantly, will we actually tackle the conversation we need to have about inequity? Who is essential? Who is important? Who matters? I know that here in Ontario, we have what it takes to provide positive answers to such questions and to be a leading force for good. There's so much we can contribute to people and places beyond our borders. But as this conference will demonstrate, we also have much to learn as well. I therefore encourage you not to let this moment pass you by. You have an opportunity today to have an expansive dialogue that is actually informed by all that we've been living through. When it comes to fully grasping the great possibility before us, the highest walls to scale and the thorniest obstacles to overcome are really not out there in the world. They're rather right inside our own minds. Your voices and visions are needed, because after all, it is together that we will save lives and livelihoods. So I thank you in advance for your efforts, your care, and your empathy. Above all, be
Have a nice
safe
setting
and
with
well.
the Lieutenant General of Ontario.
Thank you, Honorable Elizabeth Doudswell. It's indeed a nice message of carpe diem and seize the day. Thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to your continued presence in this summit and supporting and guiding us in future as well. We now have none other than Reza Pourwaziri, who is the chair of the Urban Economy Forum and co-chair of Habitat in Towns. He was previously the president of City Leaders and International Art and Architecture Research Association and the director of Middle East Regional Center of BLP, partner of Habitat. His heart and mind are dedicated to the achievement of the SDGs and making cities and towns livable and vibrant. And he's architect by profession, but he's also an architect in all other ways. He's the architect and founder of Urban Economy Forum, the Pavilion, and even the architect of Summit as well. So he's an architect in more than one sense. And I now do invite Reza Pourwaziri to take the floor.
Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, participants, Your Honor Elizabeth Downswell, Mr. Adam Wan, Mayor Sanderson, Eduardo Lopez Moreno, thank you for support and your participation. It's great to have all of you in this important meeting, and I believe we are at the beginning of one of the most important program in collaboration with UN Habitat. As you know, we are around 75th anniversary of United Nations, and we face with serious challenge in the world. We need to think about that, about many things, and we should review our lifestyle. One of the most important aspects, we should see what we did during the past decades. We believe the scale of town is really important scale when we are talking about sustainable development. When we want to realize sustainable development, we need to know what is the scale of our approach and how we can have tangible achievement. As you know, the goals number 17 from SDG Sustainable Goals, Sustainable Development Goals is participation. How we can involve people. The recent experience of pandemic shows us we are not able to do anything unless we create a kind of serious solidarity in the society. We should to involve all the people for change. And I believe this approach to involve town leadership as a part of sustainable development process is really important. Thank you, Mayor Sanderson and Town of Collingwood to collaborate, to accept and to support this initiative. We are in the process of creating this global network. We believe Canada is pioneer and could be introduced as a main pioneer of sustainable development in the world. And we are trying to start this dialogue. Of course, we need to extend this dialogue to the world, to the different countries, and involve many towns and cities. But we create here in Town of Collingwood, we believe annual Collingwood's Global Summit is a place for gathering of town leadership to come together, to exchange best practices, to learn from each other, to think about the sustainability and present real, tangible experience and challenges, potential, and we believe we need to create a kind of serious interaction between town leaders and government, central government around the world. It's not related to a specific location. This is a main challenge. And based on that, we are trying to enrich this voice globally. We need to create voice of town leaders and small cities and small habitats, and because we have a serious problem, but serious opportunities. In this, in the process of sustainability, we understand we have the resources, human resources, national resources is completely limited. We should think how we can arrange, how we can manage these resources to use efficient, based on efficient approach to get more results. Based on that, we believe that small cities and towns have a very correct and very exact and match with the mandate of sustainability. We can see what is the result of our effort, and we can involve more people and create a great participation of the society. Of course, there is a problems. Maybe the small community, sometimes, this is not a general statement, they have not, they're a little conservative about their lifestyle, but I believe we can involve more people to change and to create this kind of movement. About the sustainable development, we have different initiatives and many programs, each UN agency have their own mandate. We are closely collaborate with UN Habitat. UN Habitat focus about goals number 11. We believe we need to increase this kind of network, and we need to try to interpret the concept of sustainable development in different skills and different language to increase in interaction and bring this dialogue as a kind of practical dialogue in the society. We believe the human resource is everything, is the main resources we have for change. We believe youth is one of the fundamental, one of the key aspects for development, how we want to create this dialogue between youth. And we believe if we create some things correctly as a acceptable concept, it's increasing and extend in the society, and we have different experience, good experience, best practices in this field. On occasion of 75th anniversary, it's of United Nations, it's a kind of a specific point. It have a key fundamental. We need a fundamental view during this 75 years, and we should know about what we did in the past, and we need to change. And this is, I believe, this is a change of lifestyle. We need to see how we can change our lifestyle. Based on pandemic of COVID-19, we faced with a serious challenges, and we have some figures that show many of consumption's figures is decreasing. It has some impact on economy, but it seems we can, if we rearrange our lifestyle, we have still some capacity to fix fundamental aspect. About interaction between the town leadership and central government, we need to have kind of urban assessment without focusing about urban data and evaluation, clear evaluation, transparent evaluation. Definitely we are not able to move forward, and based on that we have a very serious gap in town leadership's system in the world, kind of urban assessment and about all the dimensions, data gathering, data mining, and presenting and combining. One of the main part of the population lived in town and small settlements, but we need to have a kind of clear urban assessment of this kind of settlement. I believe we try to create a kind of pilot project and pioneer project in town of Collingwood. We will have annual summit. Hopefully for next year we have in-person meeting. We want to create some example of sustainable development project in town of Collingwood. We believe we need to come together and share this experience, and we hope to organize global summit of Collingwood annually to have kind of interaction with UN agencies, with central government, to create a clear agenda, to get more support, but in the correct way from government, and better interaction to access the national resources to facilitate the process of sustainability. At the last point, I want to inform you, we are trying to create kind of town leadership global network in parallel of global summit of Collingwood. We invite all the town leaders to come together, join to this network. We are trying to create and enrich this global voice, and we will start to communicate with the mayor of towns around the world, and hope to and we invite all the mayors to join us. And this is your platform. We want to create this one for town leadership to have better interaction in the world. Thank you so much, and I hope to have a great, wonderful conference during 2 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reza, for your kind words. And of course, I know that now we are running a bit late, nearly 20 minutes late. Of course, I hope that we can pick it up as we go by. And next keynote speaker is Dr. Eduardo Lopez Moreno, who is no stranger to Urban Economy Forum or to Canada or to the global human settlements issues. He is the head of innovation and knowledge at UN Habitat, and he's also the honorary chair of Habitat in Towns, and has written 5 books on issues related to social housing, land policies, urban development, and urban history. And he has also written a number of scientific papers, and he is also one of the main architects behind the Prosperity Index initiative. And above all, he's also well known globally as a photographer, social photographer. He's a gold medal winner, born and living in a refugee camp. People in refugee camps who are often spectral identities who live without dialogue without answers to their questions or without future. So he has been indeed providing the kind of a view of the viewless, or the giving voice for the voiceless in that way, in addition to working for sustainable urban development. Here you are, Eduardo Moreno.
Thank you very much, Krishna. Good morning to all of you. I'm going to talk about data and urban assessment. And let me start by something simple. Data is more than a number. Les données sont plus qu'un nombre. It's not only quantitative figures, percentage, correlations, or the scripted language of policies, which will be the qualitative notion of data. We are talking about something much more than that. We are talking about how we organize society, how we act, how we define ourselves, how we measure ourselves, and how we demonstrate what we are doing. Data and urban assessment is all of these things together. But in order to work, we need to do some things. The first one is to create standards. But the standards are not only statistical measurements, they are the common understanding of how we do things. We need also targets, and targets are not only statistical definitions of what we want to aspire to. Standards are hopes, are ways of looking where we want to go and how we go there. Good data, good assessment bring always, or in the history of statistics, forgotten or neglected agendas to life, to the center of the debate. They remind us that vulnerability, invisible societies, indigenous populations, poor communities are alive. I remember in 2000, when I was given the opportunity to measure for the first time in history slums. We organized with member states in the UN what a slum definition entails, which indicators are to be used. And then we called in the Statistical Commission in the UN for countries to endorse this methodology. But when we produced the first figures, more than 40% of countries comply, because they were very high, because for the first time in history, we came to the idea that 1 billion people were living in slums. And in order to reach 1 billion people, many countries were having a lot of slum dwellers in their own countries. Towns themselves, and I like a lot something that Reza mentioned, today the definition of towns is what is left, what remains. We have the definition of city, and then what is not a city is what is a town. And then the statistics and the urban assessment associated to towns is also what we have left. This is wrong. And we need to have clear understanding and urban assessments of the importance and the role of towns, the transformative role of towns in sustainable development. We have said several times, and the Millennium Development Goals prove this, that lifting 750 billion people out of poverty, it was fundamentally because of the intermediary role that towns play in the connection to rural areas. Data, good data, and urban assessments are good to bring what is invisible, but they are also very good to do the contrary, to produce false arguments. It is surprising that only in 1980, multilateral organizations were still saying that inequality was good for development. And they wanted to prove with some data that it was true. Today, we live in a world also of fabricated stories and the use of data for that. But urban data can deliver real-life benefits for all these forgotten populations, but even for governments. But in order for this to happen, we need to have a continuous of data that is transformed into knowledge and knowledge into policy. These three elements, they don't come together. They are not automatic. We need a software of 3 different languages. We need data tools, data resources, data reports, data technology. We need community data and other forms of data and assessments. When we do that, we will have accountability, transparency, We will better organize institutions. We will open room to societies. We will deliver promises. We will measure real progress, and we will assess risks. All this seems to be understood by all of us, but the reality is that good data and good assessments were for many years a secret weapon. It is only, and Krishna mentioned this when he was talking about the Agenda 21 in the 90s, that for the first time in the history of humanity, the International Development Society brought data and information to life. It is only in Habitat 2 in Istanbul that World Bank and UN Habitat created the Urban Indicators Program and a Global Urban Observatory. Before that, data was obscure. Data was not in the development agenda. Millennium Development Goals in 2000 was the first global attempt to use data with all this notion of accountability and information as a metric, as information, but also as a policy. However, for those that were working with the Millennium Development Goals, you will recognize that for many countries, the idea was to halve poverty, to halve inequalities, to halve bad treatment to women. But these countries, they didn't have the information of what was the meaning of reducing by half. They were concentrating more on the final outcome, reduced by half, than in the process. They did not create the adequate procedures of data definition and use. They did not have the appropriate targets. They did not have spatial information, neither city data. It was only with the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 that the discussion about data targets indicators came to life, but came to life as a political weapon, not only as a technical one. It's the first time that the world defined 269 targets that for me were 269 opportunities for change. SDGs brought real accountability in the possibility of deliver not only impact, but also processes. In considering that those that were producing the data, not only Institute of Statistics, but cities and data providers should have been considered for many years before as political interlocutors. It was the first time that the world agreed that non-conventional ways of data production were also important. And it's the first time in the history, only in 2015, that cities were recognized at the global level as political interlocutors in the policy production and data production. It's in this moment that the governance of data was born. And that came with the possibility that cities defined themselves comparative advantages, opportunities, the possibility of using information for delivering of services, for creating efficiency, for measuring impact, for looking what is the meaning of achievement. Then we started talking about the small data. And the small data came with a very interesting thing. 65% of cities, according to the last survey of Habitat, 2 every 3 cities recognize that they don't have the adequate tools and they don't have the adequate information to produce good data. Data was not user-friendly, was not qualitative, enabling the policy transformation. It was incomplete in many places. The skills, the technicalities, the knowledge, the budgets were not there to produce ready-made, easily usable, clean data. And then there was a big problem, sectoral and jurisdictional silos in the use of the information. Data and territories were navigating different waters. Many places in the world were having technical, legal definitions of cities that were not in accordance with the statistical definition of the city. Today, that happened still in many places in the world. And we are saying these cities that do not have these conditions are like ships on the high sea that are confronted to turbulent waters, but they don't have the adequate navigation tools. They don't have the conditions, therefore they have poor chances to reach desired destinations. This cannot continue to happen like this. Then we need to bring knowledge in order to understand that the varying and current positions have to be connected to data, to the risk of assessment, to measuring circles of how we can move out of unattended consequences and destination. Data today in 3 out of 10 cities is not connected to policy diagnosis, to action plans, to best practices, to monitoring results, and fundamentally to impact of these policies. In order to fix this problem, UN Habitat and partners created data and best policies, best practices. And we tried not only to use data as a number, but also to see what works, where it works, and which are the ingredients that we can decant of this knowledge in order to use this information. And then it came big data. Large amounts of information that require technical assistance, computer assistance to be processed. It is estimated, and this is a fundamental thing, that 90% of the data that the world has produced was produced only in the last 5 years. Big data is a fundamental opportunity for change. However, for many cities and for many towns, and this is a conference of towns, big data become a negative externality of decision making. They don't know how to process this information, to use this information, and big data has used in many places people as numbers, and then as consumers. It is only in few contexts that people and big data have moved to urban intelligence and the use of transformative change. But for that, we need capacity building, partnership, best practices, much more funding. What we need is to understand that in the world that Elizabeth, the Lieutenant Governor, mentioned in such beautiful words of COVID and inequalities and the possibilities of change and a better narrative of the new normal, we need to use also different forms of data production and different forms of data systems. And to understand that today, COVID is telling us that data has not delivered in the promise they made to us. In many parts of the world, UN Habitat is not receiving, and if we are searching, we are not finding data about what is happening in their own cities in COVID. Few countries are doing that. And those that are doing, some of them are doing very well. But the reality is that today, we need to bring back the fundamental notion that data and urban assessments should be considered in a post-COVID or living with pandemics world, a public good. Should be considered the most important mechanism for equity and for inclusion. And we should open room for the first time to something that we mentioned, and other colleagues, scientists, the possibility of using cities as a science, as a way of changing. And also quoting Elizabeth when she talked about the reset, data and information should become a fundamental element for a societal fix. In UN Habitat, and some of you mentioned this, we have designed and worked with the City Prosperity Index and the initiative. We have tried to enable cities and governments, and I'm going to make a presentation of this later in the day, on how cities should create conditions to produce their own information and to transform this information to understand what is urban form, how economies of agglomeration are created, where spatial inequalities are concentrated, what is the meaning of disadvantages in cities. Data is open and accessible. Data should become policy evidence. Data should be part of the creativity agenda. And when data is part of the creativity agenda, government, international organization, communities, private sector, all of them should contribute with the power of imagination to produce the good data that we need. And when big data is going to be produced, we can reestablish citizenship that COVID has recalled us that many people have lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eduardo, for very succinct and important contribution in trying to explain to us driving effective change needs local data, and how cities themselves can be expert in collecting data and analyzing them for creating social change. Thank you very much indeed. I hope that, of course, hope to hear from you in the next session as well. And I would like to now give the floor to Honorable Member of Parliament Adam Vaughan. He's currently a member of the Parliament for Spadina, and he is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. From 2006 to 2014, he was a Toronto councillor who presented Ward 20. Prior to his career in politics, he was also a radio and TV journalist. He has been an arduous advocate for affordable housing, as well as using effective and sustainable technologies for building houses as well. I would like to lead the floor to Honorable Adam Vaughan, please.
Well, thank you and good morning to everybody, and in particular to James Carpenter for the good words to get this meeting started, and his lessons that he shared with us about not only the connectedness of our existence, but also the responsibility we have to think forward and to think forward in a sustainable and a good way. And as someone who comes from the lands of the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, those lessons of the Anishinaabe people are important ones for us to build upon and to build with as we move towards seizing a better future for everybody. As said, I'm the member of Parliament for Spadina, Fort York, but I work with Minister Ahmed Hussein, who's the Minister for Families, Children, and Social Development, and our ministry has carriage of the SDG file, the Sustainable Development file, as it relates to the Government of Canada's work, and of course that means that families, children, and our social development are central to the way in which we approach the UN SDGs. I want to begin by referencing COVID in relation to goal number 10, which is reduced inequalities. One of the things that COVID has done is shown that the interlocking and the dependencies that are mutually required around our economy, our social viability, and our environmental sustainability. COVID has laid bare the crises that we walked into. This pandemic has laid bare some very interesting challenges as it relates to sustainable development goals. And I think it's obvious to those of us who've been working on these files for years that if we had more achievements on the sustainable development goals, COVID would have had a very different impact on our planet, let alone our country, let alone the communities that we come from. For example, from the widening gap between poverty and prosperity is something which has really shown us exactly where inequity has had a lethal impact. It's poverty is probably the most vicious killer on the planet, and yet no government has ever made it illegal. But at the same time, the gap between rich and poor really showed us why those vulnerabilities need to be addressed, and the SDGs pointed the way to that a long time ago. It's time that the planet wake up to that. On the social side, one of the great paradoxes of COVID is that you had to isolate to save community, and yet you couldn't isolate successfully unless you had a community. And this contradiction or this paradox, I think is one of the things that, again, is caught up in reducing inequality. The prosperity gives you the illusion of community, but leaves you very much alone, whereas poverty is seen as experienced as a class, but it also reinforces isolation. And so the social fabric of our countries has been torn by COVID because it was ripped before and it was so easy to tear. And then on the environment, again, another paradox. COVID has pulled us back from our economic activities and our social patterns, and what's happened is that air quality, water quality, and the way we walk upon the land has been forever changed. But at the same time, it was poor air and poor water, which gave rise to the massive outbreaks. If you couldn't sanitize, if you couldn't breathe clean air, if your health was compromised by environmental conditions, you were more susceptible to COVID. And so it is clear that the inequality that we have subjected far too many people in our communities to is the reason why COVID has had such a devastating impact. And as I said, achieving on number 10 in particular is going to be so important if we're going to move forward in a better way, as Mr. Carpenter asked us to consider. In terms of Canada, I think that speaking as a member of the national government, I think what you're starting to see as it relates to towns and as it relates to smaller communities away from the big cities, and I do come from a big city, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But what we're seeing is that COVID has accelerated both the merging of small towns into larger communities to consolidate resources, and as people isolate, we're seeing a surge in people moving out of city centers into smaller communities as a way of protecting themselves. But what we're seeing is the larger cities actually grow in a way that threatens the existence of small communities, and at the same time, we're seeing the economies of small communities undermined. And so it's again another paradox that COVID has shown us. And if we turn to number 11 around sustainable cities, we have got to come to terms with the fact that our big cities are growing too quickly and our small cities are shrinking too fast, and we need to find a balance again in that lesson delivered to us through COVID. I think we also know that our small communities are not only home to unique cultures, but they also are the nesting ground for stronger senses of communities. The quote that Mr. Krishnan said, where if you don't know what you're doing, somebody knows about it in a small city, that collective sense in our smaller communities is critically important. But what it also points to is the fragility of our small towns. If towns don't have a way to grow sustainably, they either merge into large cities or they disappear. And so we have got to figure out a way to sustain moderate growth of cities and the moderate size of our towns in order to make sure we sustain a balance. The other thing that I think COVID has shown us as it relates to towns is that towns are on the front lines of climate change in many, many cases, in ways in which cities quite often aren't. Small towns flood faster. The fires of the forests and the bush consume them quicker. And of course, the hurricanes that bear down upon them and the tropical storms that hit them are much more severe due to the fragility of towns. And so again, from the perspective of how we sustain towns as we come through COVID, and as we take a look at where we are in this particular part of the world, at this particular part of the time, we have got to start to address some of those challenges. And so some of those challenges involve rethinking the economies of small towns. And part of that is connectivity, and part of that connectivity relates to social isolation, and that connectivity also relates to the environment in terms of being able to sustain and deliver a stable environment for smaller towns to exist in. We have a great deal of work to do, but the Sustainable Development Goals keep pointing us to where that work lies ahead, where that work needs to be focused, and where that work needs to effectively achieve. As we move towards the Great Reset, and as we move towards rethinking how we emerge from this pandemic, and how we address the existential threats of climate change and the fundamental threat of inequality, we have got to start to think about two other Sustainable Development Goals, which are critically important as we move forward. The one is 16. The fear and the worry and the threat and the danger of what COVID has shown us is that without strong institutions centered on peace and justice, none of this is sustainable. and it's not sustainable because it is just too chaotic. And so we have to return to the stability of peace and justice, and that requires a reckoning with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the ones I've mentioned, number 10 and 11. It also, however, requires us to move towards a different understanding of what 11 means in its essence, and that is that sustainable communities are not the goal necessarily, but from my perspective, sustainable development, sustainable communities and strong cities and towns are the tool that we're going to have to use to achieve global health, global economic prosperity, and global environmental stability at the most local level, at the level where people actually feel it in their lives. And so I would end by suggesting that the reason that our government, the reason that this conference, and the reason that the Sustainable Development Goals are so critical this time is that if we can figure out how to collectivize our action around the 17 goals, we will address the crises that we walked into the pandemic with, and we will move out of that pandemic with a great deal more clarity, sustainable methodologies in order to sustain our existence as the people on this planet, quite frankly. And that gets into the opening words that Mr. Carpenter shared with us about thinking 7 generations ahead. The best way to get there is to build sustainable towns. And sustainable towns have to function economically, socially, and environmentally. And they have to address the inequalities that exist in small towns and across the planet, unfortunately. And they have to start to think differently about what constitutes both the quality of life, but also how we share it more equitably. And I'll leave with the thoughts that a friend who's a writer once shared with me, which was the only real place to find a small town anymore, he once said, was in a big city. And the reason he said that was because big cities are made up of small towns. And so if we understand the health of small towns, and we protect the health, economic, social, environmental health of small towns, we will as well build stronger large cities, and through building strong towns, better large cities, and keeping an eye on all the Sustainable Development Goals, we as a planet will in fact honor the teachings that Mr. Carpenter gave us, and we will achieve prosperity for several generations in the future, because we will not eliminate it in our time. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity to sit here and listen to the forum, to listen to the wise voices that have been gathered, not just across Canada, but across the planet. And I look forward to the learnings that will emerge from these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Adam Vaughan, for sharing your views and analysis in an integrated and holistic manner. As you say, of course, the pandemics of poverty and pandemic of COVID can be conquered only through Sustainable Development Goals achievement in towns and cities. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope you will stay with us for the rest of the sessions and share your views with us as well. Thank you again. Now we have